In the sense that I'm a historian, I think de Gaulle was, I would say, almost one of the most remarkable political leaders of any country in the 20th century. He's unreplaceable. He's one-off. And are there any lessons to be learnt from de Gaulle? It seems to me that de Gaulle's qualities, which I'm going to try and explain, are so remarkable but so unique that I'm not sure that he does, even if it's going to destroy the whole point of this panel, offer us any lessons. But what we can do is at least try and analyze what makes him a great political leader. A little book, a funny little book, it's just a satire, came out by a writer I rather like, who died last year actually, Benoît Duterte, and it's called Le Retour du Général. And it's all about somebody who's obsessed with the disappearance of proper egg mayonnaise in French cafes. So he goes back home and he writes a manifesto for the future, the return of egg mayonnaise. Then he turns on his television and suddenly de Gaulle appears and says, "Oh, je vous ai entendu, je suis tout à fait d'accord." And so de Gaulle becomes the head of the new campaign to bring back egg mayonnaise, and then he becomes part of a great coalition for gay rights, feminism, etc. So de Gaulle becomes, in other words, whatever you want him to be. De Gaulle has now a sort of iconic. Margot says to de Gaulle, "Who do you compare yourself to in history? Is it Joan of Arc? Is it Charlemagne? Is it Napoleon?" And de Gaulle famously says, oh, sorry, it's here. Tintin. In other words, the point he's making is, I'm not a fantasist. I know France is not a great power any longer. We small powers, like Tintin, use our wits, we adapt. It could have been Asterix as well, but Asterix cheats because he takes the potion, and there's no potion for de Gaulle. He is the master communicator. There are different ways of being a master communicator, but his is complex, his sentences are not simple, but they work. Let's look at his career. De Gaulle was created by what? By the radio. He's the first politician of the 20th century to be created by the radio. He was nothing. He was a voice, and he used the radio to become France, you could say, to the French in France. So, and then in the Fifth Republic, he uses, with a kind of extraordinary mastery, and he's now in his 70s, he uses television to the most in the most unbelievably effective way. Now, it helped, of course, that nobody else was allowed on television. In other words, the French was, at that stage, the French public television service was very regulated. But nonetheless, he was a master performer. And he knew, let's take one example, when there was a coup d'etat by the army against de Gaulle's policies in Algeria. And de Gaulle, what does he do? Masterstroke. Remember, he's now President of the Republic. He's always dressed as a civilian. He appears on television in uniform. Clever move. Suddenly, he's not just the President of the Republic. He is general. He is the general. And in a speech lasting about 10 minutes, effectively, you could say that speech crushed the coup. I mean, again, it's too simple. By the force, the contempt, the clever. He just to give an example, he was very good at taking old words that nobody quite knew what they meant or had never been used before. And so people were puzzled. So he talked with contempt about this carteron, the généraux à la retraite. But it's got all the contempt. It's dripping with contempt. And then he ends that speech saying, Française, Français, he opens his arms, aidez-moi. It's pure theatre. And he's a great performer. How do you define, so where was he a success or was he a failure? Where was he a success and where was he a failure? Well, I would say two absolute undoubted successes. His action between 40 and 44 was quite extraordinary. Now, without de Gaulle, France would have been liberated by the Allies, that's true. But without de Gaulle, France would have been occupied by the Allies. That if France, a state in exile that de Gaulle created, was there in 1944 and 45, it was an act of willpower, negotiation, bluff, many things. But there's no way that without de Gaulle, France in 1945 would have had a zone of occupation in Germany. I think it's very unlikely that France would have had a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, because France didn't exist in 1940. But de Gaulle, by becoming France, if you want, by recreating a state in exile, made it possible for that resurrection, I think we could call it. So when I ended, my last line of my book is de Gaulle saved the honor of France, and I hold totally to that. De Gaulle was not a great negotiator. This is what he said to General Biot in 1944 about his negotiating tactics. Just say no. And then after a bit, you can reflect and possibly say yes. And I think that his negotiators in 1961, Pompidou among them, were very frustrated by de Gaulle saying, no, we are not giving up the Sahara, we are not giving up the Sahara, we are not giving up the Sahara. Then one day he said, oh, okay, let's give up the Sahara. And so they found this very frustrating. So I don't think he was a great negotiator in the normal sense of the word.